This summer, I read the autobiography of Oliver Stone, Chasing the Light. And he said something that was really interesting. He said that when he was a kid growing up, he saw the world as a lie. And I thought that was so interesting that he said that because in all my life, I've never heard anybody say anything like that. And I found it so interesting because when I was a kid, that's the way I saw the world, as a lie. Um, much later, one of my mentors, Marshall McLuhan, he coined the phrase, "We live in a theater without walls." And of course, that's absolutely true. But it's kind of similar to the way I viewed the world as, just a little kid growing up. And I remember when I was a little kid, I was, even at that time, as far back as I can remember, I was an iconoclast. And I've always been an iconoclast, and I am till this day. And I couldn't change that even if I wanted to. And I certainly wouldn't want to because I like that. When I'm guessing about age 7, I came up with a kind of a philosophy that has been very important to me. And I remember as a kid, I thought it was pretty good as a kid because I used to say it over and over and over because it kind of gave me confidence in the way I was living my life, even as a kid. And I've adhered to that philosophy ever since and to this day, and even more so. But the philosophy was simply, I believe in everything. I believe in nothing. And if you don't totally understand that, I'll try and explain it. But I'll listen to, what I meant was I'll listen to anything. But do I believe it? Of course not. So, I will always like to listen, and sometimes to people who have the most incredible belief systems or they've done the most incredible things. Um, and I just found those people so interesting. And when I was talking to them, I'd act like I was believing what they were saying because I'd be so interested in questioning them and finding out, why they believed what they believed and what they actually believed. So interesting. But do you believe it? Of course not. I mean, all I know, and that's what people are telling me. And so kind of the philosophy was you didn't have to make up your mind what you believed. I mean, somewhere maybe way down the road, you could come to a belief, you believe this or you believe that. But for the time being, I'm just listening. I'm just trying to find out what people are thinking and what they're saying because it's just so interesting. And uh, and more recently too, uh, I come to realize that Plato said, "There's one thing I know, and that's that I know nothing." It's kind of similar because it's open-ended. As long as you espouse humility, you can kind of go wherever you want to. And it's just such a beautiful thing to realize there's so much we don't know and so much we have to learn. So when you haven't made, when you believe that you don't know much or you don't know everything, it leaves the whole universe open to be discovered. And you're not in a dead end where you have to prove that what you believe is true. Because once you believe once you believe you have all the answers, then that's a dead end, so to speak. But anyway, which brings me to axiom number one of all human endeavors. And that comes from the prophet. And the prophet said, "Whatever a man does is right in his own eyes." Whatever, whatever a man does is right in his own eyes. And I believe this is totally true. Proof, ask anybody. One example of that, though, that I thought was really kind of good, and you're probably familiar with the movie Shawshank Redemption, but I think that should be in every psychology class. Um, because in because in the movie, it was kind of like almost a standing joke where everybody in prison was innocent. They'd say, "What are you in for? Murder?" But you didn't do it, did you? Of course not. No, everybody was innocent, and that's just kind of like a microcosm of all of society. Whatever a man does is right in his own eyes. Benjamin Franklin said, "Man is a rational animal. He is a reasonable creature who will always find a reason to do whatever suits him and whatever he wants." So some people have gone out and killed millions of people. Totally justifiable. 10, 20 million. Totally justifiable. It's kind of like when we were born, we cried, and then we have a chip implanted. And that chip says, whatever we believe is right in our own eyes. And this is true most of the time for most people. So when I was, this was going back quite a few years ago, but I was in a church, and I used to write for the church magazine. I kind of had an article that would go in just about every month. And one of the articles I wrote, it was titled, "The Paradigm is Not the End, but the Medium." The paradigm is not the end, but the medium. Now, if you don't totally understand that, which I'm sure you don't, I will explain that to the best of my ability in this podcast. And I just want to say that I'm trying to cover a subject that, it's taken me my whole life to understand. And I could talk about this for 10 years. So to kind of in maybe a 15-minute podcast, to give you the skinny on it, it's kind of difficult, but I'm trying to do the best I can. And on that path, I just want to tell you a story. And this story happened many years ago. And when I was younger, I went over to Europe for a couple of years with my friend Brian. And we first went to England, and his grandparents lived in London town. So I think for the first couple of months, we stayed with his grandparents, and his grandfather had remarried. But anyway, one thing I found out about England was uh, around noontime, they had this huge, sumptuous meal. He said, "This is great. They eat like this at lunchtime." But then when dinner came, you know, uh, it was a very small meal. So, I mean, this was kind of different than the way we did it. But anyway, one day, it was around, I think, 1 o'clock after we'd had this big meal. Brian's grandparents got into a bit of a tiff. And he mentioned that he said it was a bowl. And his grandmother said, "No, you said it was a basin." And he said, "No, I know what I said. I said it was a bowl." And she said, "No, no, I remember you said it was a basin." He said, "No, no, I said it was a bowl." She says, "No, no, I'm sure you said it was a basin." So anyway, this kept going back and forth, and me and Brian are sitting there like watching a ping pong game, back and forth. And it went on for like, I don't know, 2, 3 minutes. And it got really heated too. Like, "You said it was a bowl." "No, I said it was a basin." And so finally his grandmother, she got so upset. She got up and she grabbed a sugar bowl and she grabbed this huge spoon of sugar, and she went behind his grandfather, and she poured this huge spoon of sugar right in the middle of his hair. And he had this beautiful silver, finely combed hair. So he sat there for a few seconds, and he just was raging, and he turned beet red, and finally he threw his head forward, throwing the sugar on the table, and he got up and he stomped out. Now, you would have thought that would have been the end of that. But anyway, after that, I remember going to Ireland, and I hitchhiked all around the coast of Ireland for 2 weeks, and that was an incredible journey. And then we came back, and then me and Brian spent the summer. We went up to a place called Blackpool, and we worked in a Pontins holiday camp for for the summer. And then after that, we came back to London town for a short stint. before we were off again. But one night, um, uh, Brian was standing at the foot of the stairs because at the top of the stairs was the bedrooms, and Brian's grandparents were in the bedroom. The doors was closed, but it was very still, and Brian could hear them talking. And what he heard was, "You said it was a bowl. No, you said it was a basin. You said it was a bowl. No, you said it was a basin." And I just told you that story because that story is kind of like a microcosm of all of human society. So, in all of our lives, there are hundreds and thousands of bowls and basins. But the only thing that is certain is that you have absolute empirical evidence from the Bible or from science that you are absolutely correct. Proof? Just ask anyone. Now, not sarcastically, but if you kind of say, you're telling me this, but are you sure that you're correct about this? I mean, do you have proof? Absolutely. Everybody wants to be right and thinks they're right. So I just want I want to explain kind of how this works in a way that hopefully you will understand. But take religion, for example. And quite possibly you're familiar with this sort of thing, but it's so common. It's just so common. You'll get a preacher type. Okay, preacher man. And he has the Bible. And so he flips to a certain scripture and he reads it. And then after he reads it, he says, "So how do you get around what?" Then he flips over to some other scripture and he reads it and he says, "And how do you get around what?" So, and he carries on. And what he's doing is he's creating a paradigm. A paradigm. And what does the paradigm say? We're right. And everybody else is wrong. We got the big smoking gun of absolute empirical evidence that we're right and therefore everyone else is wrong. Only thing is, all the other hundreds of thousands or millions of churches, cults, groups, whatever, are doing exactly the same thing, claiming that they've got the big smoking gun. So they all can't be right. So the paradigm in this case is the end. And when the paradigm is an end, there's no place to go because you're right and everybody else is wrong. So you just got to keep proving that you're right and everybody else is wrong. And you got to huddle in a group and, pat everybody on the back and say, "Isn't it great that we're right and everybody else is wrong?" You know? And so this is just an example of how this works. So whether we're dealing, so that's just an example. So whether it's religion, science, or politics, you always claim absolute empirical evidence. So the paradigm is always the end. Is it a bowl or is it a basin? Is it slavery or is it not slavery? A few hundred years ago, in fields in places like Gettysburg, hundreds of thousands of men gathered on two sides, hundreds of thousands on one side and hundreds of thousands on the other. And they were armed with rifles and bayonets. And they clashed with great enthusiasm and passion. And they stabbed and slashed and cut and maimed and murdered each other. And in one day, hundreds of thousands of people lay dead. All because the paradigm was the end. Because each side, those that believed in slavery, the paradigm was the end, and those that believed not in slavery, the paradigm was the end. And they definitely believed the paradigm was the end because they were willing to die because they believed they were right. And they did die. So in this case, and in so many cases, the paradigm is the end. I just want to talk about something really great that happened in human history. And that was the American Declaration of Independence. And I just have a copy of a bit of what it says. And it says, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." And of course, the First Amendment that granted the freedom of speech. Now, these freedoms were so great, and this was the kind of like the first time in human history that people had espoused these awesome beliefs and freedoms. And America became like this city built high on a hill that the whole world looked up to. So amazing that people could actually grant these freedoms. And people flocked from all over the world to be part of this freedom where they could live their lives, whether it was their health, whether it was their work, whether it was their religion, whether it was their lifestyle, whether it was where they lived, whatever it was, they were free to live their lives according to their beliefs without judgment, and they were free to say the things they believed without fear of punishment. You know, Thomas Jefferson's greatest fear was that they would come when the wolves would be in the henhouse. Well, the wolves are in the henhouse now in spades. And I'm sure that you're aware of this. And remember, science, or so-called science, has every bit as much diversity and complexity and myriads of conclusions as religion, politics, and every other facet of our lives. But still, many people cherish these freedoms that we have, even though it's a dangerous time when we see these freedoms being challenged as never before. The prophet also said, "Greater love hath no man than he who lays down his life for his neighbor." And that's not because it's easy, but because it's hard. The greatest love that you can give your neighbor is to grant him the same professional courtesy that you grant yourself, to believe in what you believe, and to live your life according to your beliefs, and to be able to say your truth, to speak your truth without fear of punishment. That's the greatest thing you can give to another human being. And like I said, not because it's easy, but because it's hard. So is it a bowl or is it a basin? Is it a bowl or is it a basin? I'm sure I'm right. And I think you think you're right too. We can always go to the closet and grab the bayonets and we can finish this for once and for all. Or we can take the high road. And we can espouse the philosophy that the paradigm is not the end, but the medium. Marshall McLuhan said, "The medium is the message." And of course, that's absolutely true. And I think if George Orwell was here with us, he would chirp in, "He who controls the media controls the paradigm." He who controls the media controls the paradigm. And that's axiomatic. That goes without saying. So the choice is, are we going to take the high road? Not because it's easy, but because it's hard. Or are we going to take the other road? You know, I think there's only one fight right now that's worth fighting for. And that was the words summed up by Voltaire. And in his letter to Helvetius, he said, I wholly disapprove of what you say, but will defend to the death your right to say it. That's the only fight that I believe is worth fighting for at this time. So the choice is, do we take the high road? Not because it's easy, but because it's hard. Or do we take the other road and just simply drink the Kool-Aid? The choice is yours.